Henry Kissinger was the United States Secretary of State from 1973 to 1977 and became famous for shaping policy in Vietnam, the Middle East, and especially China. This is the untold truth of Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger was born Heinz Kissinger on May 27, 1923. He spent his early childhood in Fürth, a city on the outskirts of Nuremberg, the second largest city in Bavaria. Kissinger was the son of Louise and Paula Kissinger, a Jewish couple whom the Irish Times described as, quote, profoundly religious. In November 1923, Adolf Hitler's emergent Nazi party staged the Beer Hall Putsch in a failed attempt to overthrow the Bavarian government. 10 years later, Hitler would be chancellor, turning Germany into an oppressive dictatorship that reserved particular hostility for the nation's Jewish population. Kissinger's family was among the many that fled the country, leaving Fürth in 1938. Fortunately, the Kissingers left Germany before Kristallnacht, which occurred on November 9th through 10th of that year. Also known as the Night of Broken Glass, Kristallnacht was a pogrom against Jewish people and property, resulting in the deaths of 91 people, the looting of 7,500 Jewish businesses, and the vandalism of some 1,000 synagogues, according to Britannica. Kissinger arrived in the U.S. aged 15 and settled in New York's Washington Heights, which had so many German immigrants that it was sometimes referred to as the Fourth Reich, according to The New Yorker. During these early years, Kissinger worked in a factory making shaving brushes and planned on becoming an accountant. As detailed by The New Yorker, Henry Kissinger was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1942. He relished the role so much that a compatriot observed, "He was more American than I have ever seen any American." Historian Jeremy Suri notes how he was recruited for this role because he spoke German, had cultural knowledge of Germany, and was of Jewish heritage, which gave the Americans confidence that he would be anti-Nazi. Serving in the 84th Infantry Division, Kissinger was awarded a Bronze Star for his help in breaking up a Gestapo sleeper cell. It was during his military experience that Kissinger met Fritz Kramer, a fellow German-American some 15 years older than him. Kramer was an intense man who had animosity for both communists and Nazis, with whom he apparently fought in the streets of Weimar, Germany. Kramer's Nietzschean perspective on the world caused Kissinger to describe him as, quote, the greatest single influence on my formative years. However, according to Globalo, Kramer cut ties with Kissinger in the 1970s because he was, quote, visibly repulsed by Kissinger's egotism and vanity. The Guardian reported that Fritz Kramer died on September 8, 2003. After holding various positions in government and publishing influential books such as Nuclear Weapons and Foreign Policy, Henry Kissinger became head of the National Security Council in 1969, a year in which the anti-Vietnam War movement held some of its largest protests. According to Salon, Kissinger asked the Pentagon to outline possible bombing strategies in Indochina, the former French colony that encompassed Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Soon it was decided that Cambodia was the best target for America's fleet of B-52 bombers. This is because it was host to large tracts of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which the Viet Cong used to move fighters and equipment into South Vietnam. The ensuing campaign, dubbed Operation Menu, was conducted in total secrecy, for Kissinger knew that Congress would oppose the bombing of a neutral country. Kissinger was reportedly hands-on with the operation and was reportedly very excited by the strategy. According to a Pentagon report, Henry A. Kissinger approved each of the 3,875 Cambodia bombing raids in 1969 and 1970, as well as the methods for keeping them out of the newspapers. Ultimately, the U.S. dropped 500,000 tons of bombs on Cambodia between 1969 and 1973, killing a minimum of 100,000 civilians. A defining tenet of Richard Nixon's and Henry Kissinger's relationship was pursuing détente with the Soviet Union. According to Britannica, when Nixon assumed office in 1969, He was keen to reduce America's military commitment without losing face. Namely, he sought to achieve, quote, peace with honor in Vietnam, détente with the Soviet Union, and the opening of relations with China, which had diverged from the Soviet Union during the Sino-Soviet split, according to the National Cold War Exhibition. Diplomacy with the Soviet Union was a gravely complicated issue, but Nixon had a strong reputation as an anti-communist and tough negotiator. This gave him the confidence to pursue peace without fear of harsh criticism from conservative members of Congress. Kissinger assisted Nixon by negotiating the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, or SALT, which featured the Treaty on Anti-Ballistic Missile Systems and the Interim Agreement and Protocol on Limitation of Strategic Offensive Weapons. These were signed by Nixon and General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev on May 26, 1972. Henry Kissinger's involvement with China is perhaps his most enduring legacy. According to The Independent, Kissinger's appeal to other world leaders likely stemmed from his success in coordinating a meeting between President Richard Nixon and Chairman Mao Zedong, one that certainly elevated him from simple politician to phenomenon status. In 1971, Kissinger left Islamabad and lay low for a few days, ostensibly because he was ill. However, he had actually flown to Beijing for a secret meeting with the Chinese Communist Party. China and the US were ideological adversaries and had no formal relations, notes The Atlantic, but Nixon was intent on alleviating China from, quote, angry isolation, as he wrote in October 1967. The University of Southern California reported that Kissinger spoke with Premier Zhou Enlai, telling him, "It is the conviction of President Nixon that a strong and developing People's Republic of China poses no threat to any essential U.S. interest. It is no accident that our two countries have had such a long history of friendship." The meeting was a success, with Kissinger ranking Zhou Enlai as the most impressive statesman he had met since Charles de Gaulle. As shown in White House papers, Kissinger suggested that Nixon could visit in the spring of 1972, but the president's visit occurred even earlier on February 21st to 28th, which Nixon described as, quote, the week that changed the world. In 1973, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to Henry Kissinger and Le Duc Tho for negotiating the Paris Peace Accords, which secured a nationwide ceasefire in Vietnam, the withdrawal of all U.S. troops there, and dismantling of all U.S. bases within 60 days.
The ceasefire will take effect at 2400 Greenwich Mean Time, January 27, 1973.
Furthermore, it stipulated that Vietnam would remain split at the 17th parallel, and that reunification of the country would be achieved, quote, through peaceful means. In reaction to the prize, Kissinger said, "I am deeply moved by the award of the Nobel Peace Prize. I can only accept this award with humility." Tho, however, refused the prize because he didn't want to be associated with Kissinger, according to Time magazine. However, he may have also rejected it because of rank hypocrisy, as Tho would oversee the North Vietnamese invasion of South Vietnam in 1975. Many were appalled by Kissinger's award, including 2 members of the Nobel Committee who resigned in protest. The Yom Kippur War broke out in October 1973 when Egypt and Syria attacked Israel on 2 fronts during the holy day of Yom Kippur. The battle ebbed and flowed and was costly for both sides until the fighting ceased on October 26th, following ceasefire resolutions from the United Nations. According to Jeremy Suri, Henry Kissinger stepped in at this point and changed the Middle East dynamic. As noted by Suri, Kissinger became the leading negotiator between the Israelis, the Egyptians, and other major actors in the region. Kissinger's intervention became known as shuttle diplomacy, which referred to how he shuttled between the combatants to broker deals and achieve peace. In negotiations, Kissinger had a flexibility that was able to placate both Israelis and Arabs, which afforded him greater success than the Russians, who were blighted by Moscow's rigid bureaucratic chain. However, while he successfully negotiated borders and buffer zones between Egypt and Israel, Kissinger neglected other parts of the Middle East, namely Palestine. This would sow resentment in a region that would see great suffering in the 21st century. After the success in China, Vietnam, and the Middle East, Richard Nixon was concerned that Henry Kissinger was overshadowing him. According to Vanity Fair, Nixon thought that Kissinger considered himself to have a superior intellect and that he acted as Nixon's puppet master. Nixon also resented Kissinger's popularity with the press. Nixon would even refer to the, quote, K problem in conversations with H.R. Haldeman, the White House chief of staff. Nixon was reported to have said, "Henry's personality problem is just too difficult for us to deal with." Kissinger would use his signature flattery to manipulate Nixon, but the president sometimes distrusted his admiration. Nixon would sometimes toy with Kissinger to keep him in check. For example, Nixon knew that Kissinger desperately wanted to be the man to make the secret visit to China, so Nixon tortured him by suggesting all of the other worthy candidates for the job, forcing Kissinger to sell himself to him. Kissinger, meanwhile, privately referred to his president as "that madman," "our drunken friend," and "the meatball mind." Many people have consulted Henry Kissinger since he left office, including presidential candidates. According to ABC, Hillary Clinton said that she relied on his counsel when she was Secretary of State during the Obama administration from 2009 to 2013. Referring to Kissinger as a friend, Clinton wrote, "Henry Kissinger checked in with me regularly, sharing astute observations about foreign leaders and sending me written reports on his travels." Clinton's relationship with Kissinger became particularly contentious during her 2016 debates with Bernie Sanders, in which she said,
I was very flattered when Henry Kissinger said I ran the State Department better than anybody had run it in a long time.
Sanders would say, "I happen to believe that Henry Kissinger was one of the most destructive secretaries of state in the modern history of this country. I am proud to say that Henry Kissinger is not my friend. I will not take advice from Henry Kissinger." Henry Kissinger's legacy is divisive and controversial. A Politico article asked 10 historians to summarize Kissinger's career, and the response was broadly critical. However, the sharpest criticisms came from Christopher Hitchens, the revered public intellectual and author of The Trial of Henry Kissinger.
We as Americans think it's a disgrace that Henry Kissinger is sheltered by the U.S. government.
In it, Hitchens argues, Kissinger should be prosecuted for war crimes, for crimes against humanity, and for offenses against common or customary or international law, including conspiracy to commit murder, kidnap, and torture. According to George Washington University, judges in Chile, Argentina, and France responded to these damning accusations by summoning Kissinger for questioning. One such summoning occurred when Kissinger was staying in Paris, causing the former Secretary of State to leave the city.
Kissinger's never said a word of self-criticism, not one. And he gets very petulant and angry.
In response, Kissinger slandered Hitchens in a radio interview, accusing him of Holocaust denial. Hitchens quickly threatened legal action, saying, "Mr. Kissinger will be hearing from my attorney, who will tell him 2 things he already knows. What he said is false, malicious, and defamatory, and if he says it again, we will proceed against him in court." When Hitchens was suffering from terminal cancer, C-SPAN asked what his reaction would be if Kissinger attempted to reconcile. Hitchens said, "It would be extremely interesting, but one of the reasons I detest him is that I sort of know that couldn't happen. He wouldn't even agree to have questions submitted in writing, let alone to meet me."